Hello painters, it's Pat. In this video I'm going to show you how to paint with some instant coffee. So just coffee grounds, and we're going to work on creating a value bar like you can see here and painting some spheres. So the materials you're going to need are the weld palette, the 10 weld palette. You take the lid off of that. You're going to need some masking tape, of course your bag of coffee grounds that I put with your supplies, an eyedropper, and some sort of container for your water. I would prefer a glass jar. This is just an old jelly or jam jar. Just soaked it in warm water so I could peel off the label. The reason why I like a clear jar is then I can see the color of my water and maintain, with working with watercolor, or in this case instant coffee, you want clean water, and then you can see it getting dirty and you know to change it. I've got here a white plastic container. You could dig something out of the recycling bin. White would give you the same as a clear, because you could really see it getting sort of dirty and know when to change your water. It's pretty important that you use warm water for this. Warm water will help the coffee dissolve, help the granules become more liquid. Don't use too hot of water though. You don't want to damage your brush. So think of it like when you shower or bathe. You don't want the water too hot that you can't get in. You got to get it just right, okay? First thing you're going to do is, in your bags, you should have a piece of strip paper like this. We're going to use that for our value bar, and I'm going to have you tape that down onto the board. We're not going to fully stretch this like we will for our next paintings. All we're going to do is just tack it down so it doesn't shift around, and that's why we're painting. So just a few pieces in the corners will do the trick. And then take your number 2 pencil or any lighter base pencil, a 2H or an HB, and I want you to just sketch out those circles. So I've already got 4 here. I want 5. Do that very lightly. Of course, all the time when we draw, we want to draw lightly underneath our paintings, because we're going to end up wanting to erase some of that later and not see the pencil showing through on our paintings. So I'm going to set that tape and pencil aside, and now what we're going to do is go ahead and mix up our paint, mix our instant coffee. I'm just going to move this aside for a second. If you don't feel comfortable sketching circles quickly, you know, one way to do it is just make the motion first and then drop the pencil to the page. They don't have to be perfect. We're just looking for a relative circle. If you aren't able to do that, just grab something that you can trace and trace 5 circles in. I want 5, and I'll explain why afterward. So now I'm just going to take some instant coffee, and I'm going to mix up different concentrations. So in the first one, I'm just going to do a little bit of instant coffee. In the next one, I'm going to do a little bit more. And then the next one, a little bit more. And this is going to represent our different values. So Mr. Lau and I taught you in our foundations class, value is the lightness or darkness in a piece of artwork. You learned how to shade with drawing pencils. This is kind of the same thing. So this will be like our 2H, our lightest light, and then this would be like a 6B, or an ebony, our darkest dark. So obviously the one on the end is going to have the most coffee grounds in it, and the one on this end will have the least, okay? So now I'll seal up my bag here. Now I'm going to add some of my warm water. I'm going to use the eyedropper to do that. You may have wondered why you have an eyedropper. This is why, because then you can control exactly how much water you're putting in, okay? So I'm going to add 4 drops, 5 drops to each one here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm gonna let that soak in a little bit. I want to make sure I'm adding relatively the same amount of water, because then my concentrations will be consistent. This one at the end is going to be kind of sludgy, so that's why we need the warm water. You might need to use the end of your dropper here to kind of mix these guys up. Otherwise, they'll just kind of maintain, kind of the granule, and they'll be a little chunky to paint with. Go in here and clean that out. We'll just mix these guys up a little bit before we get going here. Just for good measure, I'm going to add a couple more drops to my lighter lights to make sure that they are light. You can already see my water is changing, but I think it's okay to continue and we'll get to work here, okay? You're going to use your watercolor brush now at this point, and that's the other thing, the final thing you'll need, the most important thing you'll need. These brushes have longer length bristles and more bristles, much softer in texture than like an oil or acrylic brush. They're meant to hold water, okay? I'm just gonna wet that brush a little bit. My first sphere I'm gonna actually leave completely white. We're not even gonna start with those spheres just yet. We're gonna actually start with our boxes below. So the first one I'm gonna leave white. Second one, I'm just gonna use my lightest light. I'm just going to paint kind of a swatch there. Then I'm going to come clean my brush again. And then I'm going to come to the next one. Also kind of mixing up those granules a little bit there. Making sure that we don't have any chunks in there. I just usually use my finger to kind of squeeze water out of my brush if I can feel I've got too much. It'll take some time for you to get the feel for how much is too much. I guess I mixed up one too many here. So I'm going to skip ahead to that next one. And then I'm going to use my last one, the sludgy one. That should be my darkest dark, right? So I'm noticing now that, sometimes with this coffee, the ratios aren't perfect. So this one's looking a little too dark for me. The transition from this value to this value is too much of a contrast, and here there's not enough contrast. With watercolor, you can come back and kind of squeeze out the water out of your brush, and I can use my brush to actually erase or pull some of that, absorb some of that paint out from the paper. So now I've got that, I got that contrast, and I'm going to just come and dip a little bit more back in. You might have to fine tune these a little bit, and that's what painting is. We're always looking at contrast and adjusting from light to dark, so I'm kind of glad that happened. And you can mix up, these as you go. Another good strategy is to use a piece of toilet paper, and you can just kind of blot it back out. So I'm going to grab that and show you. It might be something else that you want to keep by and keep handy. So if for some reason you made a mistake, or let's do a little bit on this guy over here. Say I painted something here and I realized, that's way too dark, or I don't want that there. I'll come back with my brush with quite a bit of water on it. I'll get it wet and activate it, and then I will use the toilet paper, and I can all but really lift it all away. Now, if my water was clean, I might be able to get it all completely to disappear. So your watercolor brush is not only to apply paint, but also to take paint away, sort of subtractive, almost like a kneaded eraser in drawing. You can kind of touch it and pull it out if it's dry, or add more water to, lighten it up. You'll just have to make sure that you go and change your water so that will work as you go along, okay? Last bit, and we'll finish up here now. We're just going to apply that to the spheres. And we're going to do the same thing, but this is where the final part of our lesson today is actually most important. So just like with a drawing, you always want to start out with your lightest pencil. The lightest pencil does most of the work. Now you can see in my example here, we always use a sphere when we start out with a beginning student. We're talking about the arrow demonstrates the light, where it's coming from. So I'm going to leave that part white, okay? Using my first value, I will paint pretty much the entire sphere. I might subtract out a little highlight or soften it there a little bit so I can get that to stay bright. I will also keep this down here bright for the reflected light. That's it for value 1, okay? So value 2, so you're going to do that across the whole thing with value 1, okay? Each one of these guys, you're going to do the same way. So this will give you good practice. When you're painting with watercolor or instant coffee, you're going to end up building up your layers. So just like in drawing, the 2H pencil does the most work. This guy is going to be the guy who is painted on every one first. I'm erasing a little bit, coming back with my either toilet paper or dry brush. Now I'm going to do my last one here. Now ideally I would let these dry. So go take a break. Don't you maybe make some coffee with some of your grounds here. We'll come back and we let these dry. Okay?